You can't really travel to Israel without learning about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You have to touch the subject. But our clients didn't just want to learn about the conflict. They wanted to understand, how can we solve it? So what did we do? We arranged a special panel for them with the best experts in the country, maybe even in the world, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On the Israeli side, Dr. Kedar, and on the Palestinian side, Dr. Shikaki. Let's take a look.
A little debate and talk about an issue that people rarely talk about. We hear in the media and in general so much about the conflict and how the Palestinians hurt, how the Israelis hurt. And speaking with you guys, looking into your eyes, louder, good? It's okay? Yeah? So looking into your eyes and speaking with each and every one of you, I see the empathy for the pain and suffering of both sides of the conflict. We rarely talk about possible solutions. And my personal hope, and the hope of a lot of common people in Israel and the West Bank, is that from just speaking to each other one day, and the awareness will be in a better place, the national awareness of both sides, and we will live peacefully together. So I'm happy to invite the first speaker of this debate, Dr. Khalil Shikaki. Khalil Shikaki is a professor of political science and director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research. Dr. Shikaki, please join us. Dr. Shikaki has conducted more than 250 polls among Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Since 2000, dozens of joint polls among Palestinians and Israelis with colleagues at Hebrew University. His most recent work is the second edition of a textbook co-authored with Abdel Monem Said Ali and Shai Feldman, Arabs and Israelis, Conflict and Peacemaking in the Middle East. The second speaker I would like to introduce you to is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, researcher of the Middle East at Bar Ilan University. Dr. Kedar, please join us. Okay. So let's start with you, Dr. Shikaki. If you can please, Albert Einstein used to say that if you can't explain a topic to a 6-year-old, you don't know it good enough. So if you can just, that one, you like that one. If you can just give a general overview of 10 minutes of how you see the history and roots of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You have a microphone.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be with all of you. All right, speak for me. In 10 minutes to talk about the history of the conflict is mission impossible. I doubt very much that we can do that. However, I do want to point out to 4 main events in the history of the conflict that are normally considered as the beginning of the conflict, depending on who you are. For Palestinians, the answer to the question as to when the conflict began There we go. Are you able to hear me now? Yes. Okay, I'll speak from here. If that is all right with you? I was trying to avoid using the microphone.
It's working. Working.
But you can just stand up if you want. Yeah, I'll do that standing. So I was saying that instead of going over the history of the conflict, I'd rather focus on the most important events that are normally considered to be the beginning of the conflict, depending on who you are. If you are a Palestinian, your answer to the question, when did the conflict begin, will be different than if you are an Israeli Jew. For the Palestinians, the most important date is the date of the Balfour Declaration and the British military occupation of Palestine. This would be considered by the Palestinians as the most relevant and the most consequential beginning of the conflict. I'll come back to why this is the case and how this shapes how we, the Palestinians, see the beginning, or how we see the history of the conflict. The second most important for us is 1948. The main reason for that is because the Palestinians were devastated as a nation. They no longer existed, in fact, as a nation, starting in 1948 with the creation of the refugee problem and the loss of close to 80% of historic Palestine. So nationhood as such was no longer in existence. And for the Palestinians, therefore, the Jewish Zionist victory over the Palestinians in 1948 could also be considered as the beginning of the conflict. And the third event that one can consider as the beginning of the conflict is the rise of Zionism. For Palestinians, this would be the beginning of the Jewish immigration in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Most Palestinians would consider this to be less important than the first two that I've indicated. Why? Well, I'll come back to that in a minute as well, but let me now first turn to the fourth date that is normally associated with the beginning of the conflict, and that is the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem in 1967. Most Palestinians, only a very few Palestinians are likely to think of this date as the beginning of the conflict. Why? Well, because for most Palestinians, this was only about 67 occupation. And it wasn't about the refugees, it wasn't about the almost 80% of Palestine that they have lost in 1948. So there's no way that it can be the beginning of the conflict. So why is the focus on the mandate or the Balfour Declaration? I do need to have, you said 10 minutes, so you're strict about that?
Pretty much.
Pretty much? So how much time do you?
You have like 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, okay. So
if you can speak here so we get you on camera.
sorry?
Just speak a little on front.
Sure. Okay, so I have 5 minutes. It is because the Palestinians believe that the creation of Israel, that will now come in 48, was a product of European colonialism. So that in the history of the conflict for the Palestinians, Israel would not have existed without European colonialism, and that this is the root of the conflict. That as far as Palestinians are concerned, the conflict is with colonialism, the European in particular, and that Zionism was meant to serve the interests of European colonialism rather than the interests of Jews. For Palestinians, Jews and Arabs lived as Palestinians in Palestine before the Balfour Declaration and the British occupation in peace, that they, and harmony to a large extent. The level of conflict before the British Mandate and before Zionism. So that is why Zionism is relevant. But why is Zionism not as relevant as the Balfour Declaration and the occupation? Well, that is because the Zionism emerged while Palestine was living under the Ottoman control. So there was no strategic threat to the Palestinians posed by the rise of Zionism. It was a hypothetical threat for as long as the Ottoman control was in place. Of course, as we know, that ended soon after the Balfour Declaration was made. Why isn't it the collapse of the nationhood and the emergence of the refugee problem in 1948 not the real beginning for the Palestinians? Well, that's a very good question. One would normally expect that to be the beginning. If the Palestinians are seeking an agreement, a peace agreement with the Israelis, one would expect the Palestinians to pick this date, 48. Most Israeli Jews actually pick this date, 48, as the beginning of the conflict, not the British occupation, not the rise of Zionism, and not 67, but rather 48. The reason this is not the first thing for the Palestinians is because there is a significant portion of the Palestinian public that denies the legitimacy of the existence of the State of Israel itself. This is not the majority of the Palestinians by any stretch of imagination, but it is a significant part of the Palestinian narrative. That is how we tell our own children what is the history of the conflict. The legitimacy of the State of Israel is questioned. So if the legitimacy is questioned, then we need to go back even further than the day that the State of Israel was created. And that is where we go to the colonialism period and before that. So I would say close to 2/3 of the Palestinians, maybe slightly less than that, would consider the British mandate, the occupation, and the Balfour Declaration, and the period prior to that to be the beginning of the conflict, rather than 48 and what happened after 48, including 67.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shikaki, for this beautiful introduction. Dr. Motkeda, please give us an overview, if you just can step away from the speaker.
Thank you so much, Asaf. Thank you so much, Dr. Khalil. And thank you so much, guys, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here in order to learn some things. Well, people talk about the colonialism, as we had heard from Dr. Khalil. Yet, when you listen to the slogans which are aired by Palestinians against us, one of the most prevailing one in demonstrations, in the media, you can find it in many places, in YouTube especially, is Khaybar, Khaybar, ya Yahud, Jaish Muhammad Sayaud. Who didn't understand it? This is in Arabic. And in order to understand the Middle East, you need Arabic. Just like in order to understand the United States of America, you need English. Without English, don't even try. Okay? This slogan which says Khaybar, Khaybar, yeah, Khaybar was an oasis near Medina in Saudi Arabia. In the year of 624 CE, means more or less 14 centuries ago, there was a battle between Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and the Jews who lived in that place. And he slaughtered them. And this is the narrative or the history which is documented in the Islamic books of history. Now, people today carry this memory, citing, shouting, Khaybar, Khaybar, ya Yahud, oh, remember Khaybar, Khaybar, oh Jews. Jaish Muhammad Sayaud means the army of Muhammad will come back. Means to take care of you. Just like the Jaish Muhammad means that the army of Muhammad took care of those Jews in that place. And this happened 14 centuries ago. So, where did the Jewish problem start? In 1917, in Balfour Declaration, 1917 CE, or in 1948, or when Zionism began towards the end of the 19th century, or already in 624 CE, which is 14 centuries ago. So, as much as history is important, you have to be aware of the history. Because history is still alive and kicking, and not only this, history in the Middle East is still alive and killing. How do I know? The Sunni Shia, you know, this rift inside Islam, which they pour each other's blood in millions through history. When did it start? And why did it start? It is a struggle over the succession of Muhammad between his cousin Ali bin Abi Talib, who claimed that he should be the caliph, the first caliph, and others who took the caliphate from Ali. Those who follow Ali and support his right to be a caliph, they are the Shia. And the others who took the caliphate from Ali are the Sunnah, and they are still killing each other until this very day. Means history in the Middle East is very important. And this is why you cannot start it in the 19th or the 20th century, when the slogans which you hear all around it are slogans which are taken from the 7th century. And this is why portraying the situation between us, Jews, and our neighbors as something which started with the Jewish migration to Palestine, guys, it started way before. According to Islamic Sharia, means the Islamic religious law, Jews should be dhimmis, by the way, Christians as well, should live under the yoke of Islam with very limited rights. They have no right to a state, any state in the world. They have no right to statehood, to army, to police, any manifestation of statehood, independence, sovereignty. Everything belongs to Islam. This is the belief. Not only the extremists, this is the core teachings of Islam. The Jews and Christians should be dhimmis. That's why they have a problem with the state of Israel, because we Jews already have a state. We are independent, and we fight. Jews are not allowed to fight. And this whole thing started with a collaboration between Jews and Christians. It means it's some kind of conspiracy, because Lord Balfour, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Her Majesty, was evangelical Anglican Christian. And he gave the Balfour Declaration in November 1917 out of belief the Jews should return to their ancestral land and Britain should support it. People of this area, mainly Muslims, viewed this declaration as something which, why? Who gave it to the British to give it to the Jews? Who gave it to the Christians to give it to the Jews? This land belongs to Islam. And this is the core problem. It's not something which started in the 19th century. These are the main problems of Islam: to accept the other, to accept a Jew who has a state, because according to their teachings, Israel cannot be even in the size of 1 square centimeter on the seashore of Tel Aviv. And this is their problem. And I have a proof. This is the Palestinian scarf. And this is by the PLO. It's not even Hamas. Palestine. And this is the whole state of Israel. So where exactly is Israel? According to the PLO. And this is the issue. The problem is the mere existence of the state of Israel, because we Jews have no right to a state. And this is the beginning of the problem, or the core problem. In any size of Israel, Israel has no legitimacy to exist. And this is what they learn from their heritage. This is one thing. Secondly, what we heard from Dr. Khalil is the Palestinian nation who lived here Let me tell you something. Once upon a time, 130 years ago, there was a man in Libya, in the town of Tarhuna. His name was Muhammad Ohida. It's in the desert, the Sahara Desert, some 1,000 or more kilometers from here. He had a son, Abdul Aziz. When he had a son, he joined the Ottoman army, which took people from place to place as officers. He had a grandson named Ibrahim, and Dr. Khalil is the son of Ibrahim. Means to talk about Jewish migration as the problem. Hey, migration was not only Jewish, and this is not the only family who came from Libya. In this case, many Palestinians or so-called Palestinians carry names like Al-Masri, means the Egyptian, Masarwa, Egyptians in plural, Al-Khurani, from the Horan in Syria, Tarabulsi from Tripoli in Lebanon, Sidawi from Sidon, Sida in Lebanon, Sorani from Sor, Tyre in Lebanon, Karaki from the town of Karak in Jordan, even Hijazi. And you know what the Hijaz is? Mecca and Medina, Western Saudi Arabia. Most of what the so-called Palestinians are children, grandchildren of migrants. And to portray a situation where there was a Palestinian nation which the Jews invaded into their country, this is a false presentation in the good case. And by researching the names, and they don't even try to hide the source of these people. Now, you know, people can migrate to countries like the United States of America or Australia, New Zealand, and they shape new nation. This is what happens in other parts of the world. Here in the Middle East, if you are not somebody who was born here, you are viewed as somebody who is mushminna. Mushminna means not from us, rejected. Who brought you? Who are you? You are not the man who was born here. And this is unfortunately the problem all over the Middle East. How long do I still have?
So, well, we're gonna continue.
To the next.
So I'll
Yes, just recap quickly and we'll proceed.
So, bottom line, the problem did not start 100 or so forth, of more or less 100 years ago. Started at least 14 centuries ago. This is one thing. Secondly, in the Middle East, the other, with the big O, is rejected. And this is the problem in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in Sudan, in many, more, I would say the most parts of the Arab world. This is the problem. We'll elaborate on this as well. This is not a problem which started with the return of the Jews to their ancestral land. It begins in the Arab sociology, Arab anthropology, which has to be studied before we delve into these issues, and I'll continue this later.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kedal, for this eye-opening overview. Dr. Shikaki, please describe your possible solution you offer and how it will work and why.
Thank you very much. Needless to say, I find what my Israeli colleague have said to be more nonsensical than anything else. But if I do get a chance later to respond,
Yes,
I'm happy to do that.
You can start by responding up to you. And then the solution.
Oh, you don't want me to talk about?
Just solution,
Your-
and then you can respond.
Okay. How much time do I have for both? 10 minutes?
12 minutes.
The only way that I see the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is by separation. I don't think Israeli Jews and Palestinians, given the history of the conflict, can live together in a single state. But we, the Palestinians, are divided on this issue. We essentially have three views on how to resolve the conflict. Our most extreme elements in our society are what we call Islamists. And these Islamists, who constitute approximately a third of our society, among those, the majority, about 20 to 25% of all Palestinians, believe that the mere existence of the State of Israel is unacceptable. And for them, therefore, the entire area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea must be Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian. This view is not shared by the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian public. Most of the Palestinians believe that an independent state of Palestine living side by side with the State of Israel, based on 1967 borders, is the best solution to the conflict. There has been changes over time in terms of how many Palestinians actually support this view. I have been conducting the surveys, as Asaf has said already, since 1993. So for 30 years, I have been asking Palestinians what kind of solution they prefer to the conflict. And I know 30 years ago, 80% of the Palestinians preferred this solution, a state of Palestine living side by side with the State of Israel. Today, we don't have that much support. Why? Well, for various reasons. If we get time, I can explain. Our own kids, mine included, as well as all those who are somewhere between 15 and 29 years of age, prefer a different idea, a different concept for resolving conflict, what they call a one-state solution. A one-state solution in this case is seen as one in which the entire region between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea would become a single state. That single state whereby Israeli Jews and Palestinians can live together with equal rights. One person, one vote. To them, the current reality in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip is no longer just military occupation, but rather a one-state reality, whereby the separation between the two peoples into the two peoples, the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, is no longer feasible given all of the settlements throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and that therefore the future is for the one-state solution, that Israel is becoming more and more right-wing, and that there will be no Israeli leader with the courage to agree to evacuate settlements and allow more rational separation between the two sides into two states. This is not the view of the majority, but it is the view that is supported by a plurality of Palestinian youth. Going back to what I started with, I don't think this solution is one that is reasonable to a large extent because Israeli Jews are opposed to it. The only idea of the three ideas that I've just mentioned for resolving a conflict that had in the past, it no longer does, but at one point it did have a majority support among Israeli Jews. And based on the research that I have done with my Israeli colleagues, we do conclude that it is possible to restore a majority support among Israeli Jews for this idea. And that is the idea of a two-state solution. So the idea of a two-state solution, despite the fact that today only a minority of Israeli Jews and Palestinians support it, is, in my view, the only viable solution to the conflict, despite the difficulties that we currently face in terms of the support of the two publics, as well as the lack of leadership on both sides to take the risks involved in moving forward in this round. So, now you want me to address the...
Please do.
Okay. To see that the conflict is a religious one is exactly what you have heard from my Israeli colleague. We do have some Palestinians who think that as well, who think the conflict is religious, and these And even this, among our own Islamists, is a minority view. For the overwhelming majority of the Palestinians, this is absolutely not a religious conflict. This is not a conflict between Jews and Arabs or Jews and Palestinians. Absolutely out of the question to think in those terms. The conflict that my Israeli colleagues have referred to back to the days of Muhammad was also not a religious conflict. To begin with, Jews who lived in Khaybar lived in peace with their neighbors. The reason that Muhammad had to evacuate and kill the fighting men of that group in Khaybar was the fact that they sided with his Quraysh enemies, who were actually about to destroy his base in Medina. So as that attempt by Quraysh, who were Arabs like Muhammad, failed, Muhammad turned to the Jewish enclave that was not too far away from Khaybar. Not because they were Jews, but because they were traitors. To him, they were traitors who were attempting to side with and work with his own mortal enemies who were about to destroy him and his base. So even that example is not about religious conflict. And in fact, if one is to present the Islamic religious laws regarding Jews and Muslims or Arabs, there is absolutely no enmity or conflict that is essential in that relationship. Back to today, the term Khaybar Khaybar, Ya Yahud Jaish Muhammad Sayyid is in fact uttered by some of our own crazes, just like we hear this today. Today if you go to Jerusalem, you will hear some of their own crazes, the Jewish crazes in Jerusalem, who will be calling for the murder of Arabs. Just like we have our own crazes, they have theirs. But I do not consider their crazes to represent Israeli Jews in any way, shape, or form. I consider them crazes. The huge mistake that anyone interested in peace would make is to consider the crazes, the most extreme minority on the other side, to represent the views of the majority on that other side. This is a huge mistake that we should refrain from making. Our surveys show that there is indeed a significant part of people on both sides who are willing to make that mistake, to think that the extreme minority on their side, on the other side, represents the views of the overall majority on the other side. And that this perception, this misperception of the reality on the other side is absolutely dangerous, because it generates hate, anger, frustration, and a call for violence against the other side. That is what this thinking can lead to, greater violence among Palestinians and Israelis. We need to see how these fringe elements in both societies, who are the most extreme, would of course want this conflict to continue forever. Those who hope to achieve peace should read reality as it is. In our surveys, we ask Israelis and Palestinians three identical questions. Do you want peace? What do you think the majority on your side want? What do you think the majority on the other side want? What do we find? A majority on both sides says, yes, we want peace. A majority on both sides say, yes, my people want peace. But a majority on both sides says the other side does not want peace. That is the nature of the misperception that is prevailing on both sides. That is totally inaccurate. This lack of informed knowledge about each other is fed by this kind of narrative that we have just heard. That narrative is absolutely destructive to any future rational relations between Palestinians and Israelis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shikaki. Dr. Kedar, please present your possible solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Well, first I have to relate to something which was said, that a small fringe would recite this Khaybar Khaybar. Yasser Arafat, the president, the leader of the Palestinian national movement, I don't know how many times in his life was recorded, and it's all over the internet, shouting, Al-Quds Rayhin Shuhada bil Malayin, means to Jerusalem are walking millions of martyrs, means millions of people who are willing to kill themselves in order to liberate Jerusalem, the Jewish capital. Okay, so it's not a fringe minority, it is the leader, and those who follow him, like Hamas and the other organizations, definitely believe in this. And look, minority, Hamas, the terror organization as designated by the United States of America and other countries, have their control over Gaza, the state of Gaza. And now they are threatening the PA. It's not a minority. This is something which grows bigger and bigger because the PA has no future, in my view. The PA was created by Israel, unfortunately, and this actually makes it illegitimate in the eyes of the majority of the people, because this was supposed to serve the Israeli, the Zionist purposes, as they claim. So, what is the, by the way, surveys which Dr. Khalil talks about. And yes, many count on surveys which come out from his notorious organization which deals with surveys. Let me just take you back to the year of 2006, not long ago. There were elections in the Palestinian Authority, and according to the surveys, Hamas was supposed to get around 40% of the vote, no more. So then Condoleezza Rice, the advisor, President Bush, said to the Israeli government, hey, they are not going to win, let them run in the elections. Although they are a terror organization, after all, they will not get more than 40% according to the surveys of the Shikaki survey home. Well, they won in, what, 60%?
No, 44%.
4%?
44.
44, but they have the majority, miraculously, they have the majority of the Palestinian Legislative Council. Oops! Okay, this is what comes out when surveys are being made on this society, and there are reasons why the margin of error is very wide. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come to the solution, and I do want to find a solution because Israel should be forever a Jewish state, means a state with Jewish majority. Anyway, we have 20% of our population citizens, Arabs in the north and in the south. We really don't need, we do not need Gaza, we do not need the large parts of the population in Judea and Samaria in order to change the nature, the characteristics of the state. Yes. Having said that, we want to create something peaceful, not something which will turn to be another Hamastan. And right now, if there is a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, nobody in the world can guarantee that this state will never turn into Hamastan. Just to remind you, when we left Gaza in 2005, Gaza was under the Palestinian Authority for almost 2 years. In June 2007, Hamas took over, threw the policemen from the roofs, shot them dead, and this is how Gaza, who was under the PA, became Hamastan, under Hamas terror group. Who can guarantee that the same thing will not happen in Judea and Samaria? In the future Palestinian state, which people design on Judea and Samaria. Who with the right mind repeat such an experiment hoping that the results will be different? You know Albert Einstein. he said that insanity, he was a physicist, insanity is to repeat the experiment and to expect different results. So for a physicist, this is insanity. Okay, for people like us who are suffering from what happens in Gaza, only 2 weeks ago we had these clashes with Gaza, we definitely don't need another version of Gaza much bigger in Judea and Samaria. And nobody, even Dr. Khalil, cannot ensure that this state will never become another Hamastan, especially after they won the elections already and the majority of the Legislative Council already in 2006, it can repeat itself. So what is the solution? In order to find a real solution, we have to understand the Middle East. And this is my expertise. For over 50 years, I deal with sociology of the Middle East. Roughly, the Middle East is divided to two kinds of states: the failing states and the successful states. The failing states are Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Libya, Algeria, Sudan. Let's assume this is the whole list. The successful states are Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, Qatar, Ras Al Khaimah, Fujairah, the Emirates in the Gulf. What is the reason that these are failures and these are successes? Some would say the oil. Wrong. Iraq has a lot of oil, and Iraq is a failing state. The same as Libya, failing state with a hell of a lot of oil. The same in Sudan and Yemen, who also produce oil, and they are failing states. While on the other side, Dubai, for example, has no oil and no gas. And Dubai is a heaven on earth. So evidently it's not the oil. Because if the oil was the reason, Iraq and Libya and Yemen and Sudan would be heaven on earth, and Dubai would be hell on earth. But the situation is totally opposite. What is the reason? The reason is sociology. Iraq is sharply divided to 74 tribes. Oh, no, I know in the States you don't talk about tribes because it reminds people about the Red Indians, but this is the Middle East. It's a different culture. Iraq has 10 religions: Muslims, Christians, Sabais, Mandays, Druze and Alawis who ran away from Syria, Zoroastrians, Yazidis, and this is not the end of the list. Iraq has sects like Sunnah and Shia and others, and Iraq has ethnic issues between Arabs and Kurds and Turkmens. This is the source of all evil in Iraq, because Iraq is a heterogeneous society. This is why it is a failure, because people are fighting each other, and the state which tried to impose its agenda on everybody is viewed as the enemy by all of them except for the tribe, the Dulaimis, who are controlling the country or under Saddam. The same thing in Syria with the Alawis who control the country, who are infidels, idol worshippers, and there is no way that they control Muslims. The same thing in Yemen with hundreds of tribes. I could show you the maps. Libya, tribes. And this is the source of all evil in these countries, because the society are people who are fighting each other, and the state is held by one tribe. This is why the state is viewed as the enemy of the people. Why? Kuwait, Qatar, and the other successful states are, each and every one of them is based on one single family. Kuwait is Al-Sabah. Al in Arabic is extended family. Al-Sabah, this is Kuwait. Qatar, Al-Thani. Dubai, Al-Maktoum. Abu Dhabi, Al-Nahyan. Saudi Arabia, Al-Saud, means a family. This is the only thing which works with the Middle East. This is a tribal society, unfortunately. Not everybody is as modern as the Americans or the British or the Israelis or people who live in Beirut or in Cairo. The majority of the Middle East are people who are still thinking and behaving in the tribal way. Look, at Bar Ilan, I gave every year a whole seminar about tribalism in the Middle East, which is not only alive and kicking, it's alive and killing. And all the problems which you see in Iraq, which the Americans never understood, and this is why America failed. Afghanistan, 11 ethnic groups in one single state. The Soviet Union fell apart according to ethnic lines. Yugoslavia fell apart according to ethnic lines. Czechoslovakia was divided according to ethnic lines between Czech and the Slovaks. Ethnicity is still alive and kicking. And if you ignore it and you shape states comprised of many groups, you get atrocities like Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. While if you create a homogeneous state based on one homogeneous group, you get heavens on earth like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Kuwait, and Qatar. And this is, I would say in a nutshell, in a pistachio shell, an introduction to the modern Middle East. What are the problems of the Middle East? So which paradigm should we deal here with? Should we adopt the failing paradigm of creating a state, or should we emulate the Emirate solution? And this actually what led me to the 8-state solution between us and the so-called Palestinians. First of all, Gaza. Gaza for 16 years already, in a month it will be 16 years, is a state. We don't like them, they don't like us. But from the functioning point of view, Gaza is a functioning state. They have borders, they have government, they have army, they have police, they have judicial system, they have economy, they have education system, they have military industry, and they know how to produce missiles. And from any factual point of view, Gaza is a state, whether we like it or not. And we have to understand that this is a state. And nobody in the world is going to kick Hamas out of Gaza. So this is the first state which already exists for almost 16 years. And the next will be the Emirates in Judea and Samaria. When you look at the sociology in the Judea and Samaria, you can find very easily that people from Hebron usually do not get married with people from Shechem, from Nablus. They are mushmin, not from us. A girl, let's say 20 years old, who is healthy, both physically and mentally, from Hebron, has no option in general, has no option to get married to a boy from out from Hebron. Why? Mushmin, not from us. The same thing in Nablus, the same thing in Jericho, the same thing in Ramallah, the same thing in Tulkarem, Kalkilia, Jenin. And this is actually what led me to the solution. In order to create peaceful entities, they have to be based not on a dream about a nation which doesn't exist, just like the Syrian or the Iraqi or the Libyan. It has to be based on the real thing in the Middle East, which is the tribe, means the clan. And I can refer you to an article which was written by a researcher, Palestinian researcher, named Mashhur Batran from Birzeit University, who published 2 years ago a whole article about, under the title, "The PA and the clans, who controls whom?" And in his survey, he proves that on the ground, the powers which lead the people in Judea and Samaria, the Arab people, are the clans, not the PA. The clans are the more important. You can call it Cosa Nostra. I'm talking from the positive point of view. The clans are the network of supporting, especially financial support. They are organized with power, with everything, just like it is in the Middle East. And we have to correspond with the sociology of the Middle East, and not to impose on people from the Middle East solutions which are imported from the European culture or from the American culture. And this is, by the way, the reason why all the initiatives which came from out of the Middle East failed. Because people in Europe think like Europeans, people in America think like Americans, while the culture of the Middle East is tribal culture, which doesn't correspond with ideas which come from Europe or America. This is why and Mashhur Batran, the guy who wrote this article in Palestinian Studies. This is a periodical, academic periodical. He concludes, if we don't become a civil society which everybody can get married with each other, footnote, it will never happen, or not in the foreseeable future, the only solution which can be implemented is what Mordechai Kedar came out with, the Emirate solution. Means he admits that the only solution in the foreseeable future can be the Emirate solution. Israel should remain in the rural areas and offer Israeli citizenship to the villagers, which are like 15% of the population, while the majority of the population which lived in the cities should live in Emirates, the Emirates of Hebron, the Emirate of Jericho, Ramallah, Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarem and Kalkilia, 7 Emirates, just like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Kuwait and so forth, while Israel should remain in the rural areas, and if they want to have a, let's say, a federation, let them have a federation, we have no problem with this. But this is the only solution which corresponds with sociology, and sociology has to be taken in account.
Okay, Dr.
Otherwise,
Kedar.
you get atrocities like Syria and Iraq.
Thank you, Dr. Kedar, for this, for presenting your solution. Dr. Shikaki, I would like you please to address Dr. Kedar's possible solution and explain to us why do you think it could or could not work, and any other matter you would like to address.
It is not going to work because the Palestinians will certainly reject any idea that the entire area of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip be a single state. That is certainly the top, most vital goals of the Palestinian people. Any other solution that does not meet that requirement is going to be rejected. Professor Kedar's solution is to tell you that the danger is that a single Palestinian state will become a Hamas-stan. So he wants to create 8 Hamas-stans for you and convince you that that would be a good idea. So instead of 1 Hamas, he wants 8 Hamases. This seems to be ridiculous. And the reading of the societies in the entire Middle East, and particularly in the Palestinians, might have been something that might have some hint of truth some 200 years ago. For someone living today in the 21st century to actually think along these lines is someone who certainly shouldn't be teaching the sociology of the Middle East. The entire Arab world has changed over time, although families and tribes continue to be an important player in domestic issues, and in particular rural areas, including in Palestine. The role of families and tribes has significantly been eliminated, most importantly for the Palestinians after 1948, but it had already been significantly weakened by the rise of Palestinian nationalism early in the century, which had already weakened these ties. And the conflicts that are raging in the Middle East are certainly not related to either religious or tribal issues. They are more related to the absence of liberties and freedoms and to the overwhelming levels of corruption that are prevailing in these countries. There is no doubt, and if there is absolutely no difference between the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Iraqis, although the Iraqis are a little bit more educated and more willing to adopt the nationalist and Western narratives about the nature of the political system and political organization. But the Saudis, the example of a successful state, is the one that still, because of the history of the ruling family in place, is the one where tribes remain the most important social player in that country. in Kuwait and Qatar and the others, they also do play such a role, but not as much as in Saudi. So all the successful examples are in fact examples where tribes are much more pronounced and much more active in politics in these countries than the other countries that are failed. The failed countries are countries where education has gone forward in significant ways. The demand for liberal democratic values in these societies have gained momentum, unlike places in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and others, where these liberal democratic values have not yet gained that kind of importance for most people. It is this issue of education, particularly for the youth, education, attachment to liberal democratic values and other Western values, and the demand of the state to combat corruption that is responsible for a lot of the violence and bloodshed that we see in these countries. People want liberties and freedoms and dignity from the state that is being denied to them. This is definitely, has absolutely nothing to do with either religion or the tribal nature of the societies. For most cases, these societies are definitely not societies with such pronounced tribal importance. On the piece, on the idea that there would be 8 states, I don't think that it is in the best interest of anybody, certainly the Palestinians or our neighbors, the Israelis, to have to deal with 8 different states in the region. All of them will also be demanding rights that the state of Israel is not going to be able to deliver, since the Israeli army will be the one basically in control. These are not real states. These are protectorates. It is basically the status quo, but with a different name. The only solution that the Palestinians can live with and Israeli Jews can live with as well, the one that is sustainable, the one that can indeed bring long-term peace and long-term stability, and an end to the conflict. Most importantly, an end to the conflict is one in which the Palestinians are able to have their own state, which, as I said earlier, is vital goal number 1, based on 67, vital goal number 3, with East Jerusalem as capital, vital goal number 3, with the refugees having the right to return to their homes and property inside Israel, which is goal number 4. Although that is the principle of the right of return. The overwhelming majority of refugees does not want to return to their homes and property inside Israel. Although in theory this is their right, and they demand to have that right. If they have that right, our surveys show that the overwhelming majority, more than 90% of the Palestinians, or the refugees, this is based on the research we have done with the head of the household in 2,500 refugee families. They want to live in the Palestinian state, or in the case of Jordan, for example, the majority wants to live in the host country. One thing that because it was addressed directly to me and to the work that my center did, was about the outcome of the elections in 2006. Professor Kedar misrepresented the findings and represented our conclusion from the findings. We're not responsible for the conclusion of Condoleezza Rice. If she said what you said, she said. I don't know that she said that. But the electoral system in 2006 was a two-way system. One was proportional representation, where you get the number of seats based on the number of votes. So this is proportional representation. And this is what the surveys were meant to address. And actually, we didn't predict 40% for Hamas. We predicted 37% for Hamas. So we were actually off. You can find our survey today on our website. All the details of everything we have done is already on our website. So you can see that in that year, we predicted that Hamas will have, 1 week before the elections, we predicted Hamas will win 37% of the popular vote in the proportional representation part. This is not the other part where half of the seats were divided based on a majority system. For the majority system, we actually said for the overwhelming majority of the seats, we cannot call the results. Why? Because the gaps were very, very small. Although personally, my conclusion was that the ruling party today in the West Bank would lose miserably in these areas, not because they were not popular. That is not the reason, but rather because they were fragmented. This fragmentation, imagine yourself now in New York City, and you are voting for a Senate, for the Senate, you are selecting two. And you'll find that on the Democratic side, instead of 2 candidates competing, you had 12 candidates from the Democratic Party and only 2 from the Republican Party. Which 2 candidates are going to win? The Republican candidates will win. New York? Yes. Why? Well, because a majority system punishes fragmentation. Instead of dividing the pie over 2 from the Democrats, you're dividing it over 12. That's exactly what happened with the Nationalists. The Nationalists had 6 candidates per seat, 6 per seat in those elections. This is why they lost. It wasn't because Hamas was popular. In fact, since we're talking about 2006, this is a long time ago, but on average, every seat Hamas won in the majority system, that is in the districts, not proportional representation. I'll come back to the proportional representation in a minute. But in the system that was majority, and you vote for the candidate that you want, from the party you want, Hamas average vote per seat, winning seat, 29%. 29%, Hamas won 60%, 58% of the seats in the districts by an average of 29% of the vote. What about the proportional representation? Well, we predicted all the parties. So I'm going to give you what happened with our prediction for all the parties. We had essentially 3 types of parties. We had Fatah. We predicted Fatah will receive 42% of the popular vote. 42%. We predicted all third parties, what we call the left, to win 15% of the popular vote. We predicted Hamas will win 37% of the popular vote. And this is 1 week before the elections. We said 7% of the public remains undecided. If anyone would now just go to pcpsr.org, go to our survey part of the site, look at 2006 findings, look at the predictions 1 week before the elections. This would be January, early January 2006. You'll find the numbers that I've just indicated. What was the outcome of the elections? Fatah, we predicted how much? 42%. How much did they win? Exactly 42%. We predicted the left would win 15%. How much did they win? Exactly 15%. We predicted Hamas will win 37%. How much did they win? 44%. All the undecided went with Hamas. There was absolutely no way that we would be able at that time to predict that all of the undecided, who might have already decided but refused to tell us, would go to Hamas. But that's exactly what happened in 2006. Surveys were absolutely accurate. We had presidential elections a year before, and you can also find this today. Now go to the same website and look for January 2005 survey. You will find our predictions for the presidential elections. How accurate were we? Exactly accurate. We predicted 63% of the vote will go to the president. He won by exactly 63% of the vote. We predicted the other guy would win 20%. He won, I think, 22%. So that's how accurate our surveys were in predicting elections. Now, one of course can quarrel with surveys. We know that in Canada, in the US, and everywhere in Israel, in recent years, surveys have come under attack because of sometimes inability to predict outcomes of elections. For the most part, our job is really not to predict outcomes of elections. Our job is to deliver to people the opinion of other Palestinians, not outcomes of elections. Why? Because in general, it is much more difficult to predict behavior of respondents than to figure out what they think. People are proud of what they think and they tell you what they think. But when you ask them about their own personal behavior, particularly about elections, people will say, who the hell are you? Why do you want to know how I will vote? It's none of your business. So people tend to either lie about it or be reluctant to give you what they think. In 2006, we think the 7% who told us they don't know might have already known that they will vote for Hamas, but refused to tell us. So this is why we're always careful with predicting outcomes of elections, because we know that people are reluctant to tell us about behavior while they are proud to share with us their own political views.
Thank you, Dr. Shitaki. Now we have a few minutes for questions. If anyone wants to address any of the experts, please feel free. Yes, Ron.
Yeah, Dr. Shitaki, point number 4 in your solution included the right of return.
Yes.
And you sort of just ease the minds of Israelis by indicating that your very accurate polls show that most Palestinians, even if granted the right to move next week into Tel Aviv or Netanya or wherever, would forego this opportunity. I can anticipate very few Israelis who take the risk to find new neighbors after 80 years.
You have the right to question that. In fact, we did 2 surveys. We did this survey, this was a long time ago, so we haven't repeated that survey. But the next day, after we had that survey, we did a survey among Israeli Jews. This we did jointly with Tel Aviv University. Our work started, the joint surveys, in 2000. So between 2000 and 2015, this was done jointly with our colleagues at the Hebrew University. Starting in 2016, we moved to the Israel Democracy Institute in Jerusalem and with our colleagues at Tel Aviv. Our most recent joint survey is now on our website. It was released in January of this year. So the survey that we did among the Israelis was to ask the Israelis exactly the question that you are talking about. We asked the Israelis, do you believe the findings that we have just done? We've just done a survey. It shows that more than 90% of the Palestinian refugees, when given the right of return, have decided to live not in Israel, that they will not go back to their homes and property inside Israel, but rather want to live either in the Palestinian state or in the host country. And with various variations. These surveys were conducted among refugees in Jordan, in Lebanon, West Bank, and Gaza. They did not include Syria, because we couldn't do the survey in Syria. The survey was with the head of the household. We basically said to the head of the household, imagine a peace agreement has been reached along the lines of a two-state solution. We, at that time, presented the Clinton parameters as sort of a description of what this agreement would be, and then said, President Clinton proposed the following methods or means or modalities for resolving the refugee issue. So he said, the Palestinian refugees will have the right to return to their homeland. So he was vague. We used the same language he used. And then he said, but then they have the option of taking their families to live in the state of Palestine or remain in the host country, or a number would be allowed to live in Israel. A sovereign Israel will determine a number whereby refugees would be allowed to live. So we gave people all these choices. And now we said, okay, so this is the political context that we are addressing. Where would you, now as the head of the household, where would you take your family? The main reason, by the way, for the survey, this survey we did jointly with our Ministry of Planning. The Ministry of Planning wanted to know, if peace comes at one point, how much demand will there be on the economy, our economy, in the West Bank and Gaza? How many people should we expect? What quality of people would they be? Age-wise, qualification in terms of education, what kind of professions? Are we going to have people who are farmers? Are we going to have people who are more professionals, doctors and engineers and whatnot? So the survey was actually meant to address these issues rather than the political side of things, but in order for us to get to that question, we had to ask all these questions so that we would know what kind of choices people would be making. Israeli Jews said, no, we will not agree to that solution. But that was the Clinton parameters. This was not a Palestinian solution to the conflict. The text that we presented and read to respondents was the ideas that came to be known as the Clinton parameters. President Clinton presented these ideas to both Israeli side and Palestinian side. Both agreed in principle with these ideas. And this was the issue regarding the refugee. We as researchers were not part of the design of that solution.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one last question and then we'll go proceed to the next talk.
Probably have more than one, but anyway, quick question, and we had a great meeting, we went to Ramallah and had a great meeting with the PLO, but something that between asking questions to Ron, I want to tell you thank you for doing this, because we are trying to understand and have been asking questions the whole trip of how does this work, how does this conflict resolve itself, but something that troubled us is PLO currently paying or incentivizing people that have sent martyrs into Israel?
There is a system in place that has been in place for more than 45 years already, whereby if you die in the struggle, that is, if you die while fighting against the Israeli occupation, this is something that started before the Oslo Agreement 30 years ago. So this precedes all of that.
734.
And it basically says if you die, your family will be taken care of. It is not exactly Social Security, because even if you are rich, the PLO would still pay for the education of the family. Not education, but pay a stipend for the family. Similarly, if you are arrested and you spend time in jail, this has been, the arrest issue has been, and those who die, has now been tweaked here and there. So if you're a Hamas person, for example, they don't pay you anymore, or if you're Islamic Jihad, they don't pay you. But they pay the families, the PLO does, the families of people who tend to be seen closer to the PLO mindset. Israel negotiated with this PLO that had that kind of system in 1993. It never asked the PLO to change the system. It never, in the past, considered this to be an incitement to violence. Now, if you met in Ramallah, I don't know whether you met with our security services, but if you met with the heads of our security services, they will say to you that this payment is the kind of insurance we have in which we are able to cool the minds, the family members, and ensure that they don't take revenge, that this is part of buying off these families, controlling as much as possible the level of intensity of the conflict when people die or are arrested and the families are left without any support. About 3-4 years ago, the PLO started a discussion. I was invited to some of these discussions to basically tell them what I think the public, how the public will react. In which the idea was, how can we transform this into a social security system? Instead of paying based on what you do, we pay based on your socioeconomic status. So this was the original idea. We did a few surveys for the PLO to look into that and see how popular this would be. We found zero acceptance, almost none whatsoever among the public, and so the Palestinian president backed off from the idea when we told him, unfortunately, you haven't done your homework. Your narrative hasn't been able to reach the public. You haven't been able to convince them that this is the way to get. So before you make this a law or change the regulations, ensure that your narrative is successful. Communicate more effectively with people so that attitudes can be changed. He hasn't done that, I must say. And so we haven't really moved on that file. The current system, in my view, is totally irrational and needs to be worked out. But we do not have a courageous leadership in Ramallah to be able to address this rationally in a manner that will make economic sense and help maintain social cohesion. And the reason we don't have the courage, our leadership does not have the courage, is because it does not have electoral legitimacy. Our president was elected in 2005 for 4 or 5 years, and his term ended 14 years ago. So when we ask the public today, is he legitimate as president? The answer by the overwhelming majority is no. Our most recent survey shows 77% demand his resignation and demand new elections. And if elections are held today, he definitely will not be elected. He certainly is not popular at all.
Thank you so much. We should get going. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Again, sir, thank you very much for coming to our debates. We really enjoyed the trip across the PLO. It is eye-opening for the United States to come here, see it in person versus what we hear on the news. We love peace, and that's what we're all looking for. And I just have one thing, and I don't know if it's just your fringe group. From the United States, we heard approximately 1,400 rockets came across from your side. And I don't know if that's the real small fraction of the people that are doing it that's impacting the rest of the population unfairly. And how do you reduce that threat so that the rest of the people aren't in harm's way when they do that? That's both sides of the border. And just, if somebody shot rockets into the United States, we wouldn't like that either. But I don't want to see anybody hurt. You know, how do you put that, how do you turn that fuse down, that portion of the population, so that doesn't occur anymore? That's all I'm looking for. I'm not taking side, just saying, I hate when this is
So most Gazans share your view that rockets should not be used. But most Gazans also believe that rockets are essential as leverage to force Israel to ease the siege and blockade over Gaza. So the Gazans live in poverty. You know what's the per capita income of Gazans today? $1,000. In the West Bank, $4,000. In Israel, almost $50,000. So Gazans live in total poverty, and they want to get out of that. Part of this poverty is imposed. Israel does impose a siege and blockade over Gaza. Now, Israel says it has its reasons. Hamas controls Gaza. Gazans don't care that much about this issue of the rockets. What they care about is the ability to influence Israeli decision making. If this can be done through negotiations that Hamas can lead, successfully leading to the end of siege and blockade, our survey shows there would be absolutely no support whatsoever among Gazans for use of rockets against Israelis. In the absence of an agreement, this will remain the case. Israel will continue to use violence against the militants in Gaza and will continue to impose siege and blockade that is responsible for the impoverishment of Gaza today. And in my view, because the best thing is to reunify the West Bank and Gaza with Israel's help, create greater prosperity in Gaza, allow not 20,000 or today about 18,000 laborers from Gaza to work in Israel, but allow 100,000 laborers from Gaza to work in Israel. Gazans would love to do that. They are very good, hard-working laborers, and almost none of about a year ago, Israel allowed the number that exists today in terms of labor, about 18,000, to work inside Israel. None of the 18,000 over a period of 1 year has ever committed violence against Israelis while working inside Israel. And that is certainly something that I would say Israel should do a lot more of. By doing so, it would give Gazans room to breathe, improve economic conditions, reduce the need to have that leverage, which is the rockets that we're talking about.
Okay, I would like to invite Dr. Kedar to just recap, 1 minute recap, and we will head towards that door to our next stop.
Well, first of all, the pay for slave law in the Palestinian Authority is law number 19 of the year 2004. Means 19 years ago, they started officially to pay for slave. Now, let me ask you one little question. How would you treat a state which pays for people to kill Americans? Okay? This was what we have to deal with. Secondly, people show Israel as the one which is responsible for the problems in Gaza. Very few people know that Gaza has borders, not only with Israel, borders with Egypt. And you know, Egypt is an Arab country which could be very helpful to Gaza. After all, Gaza is an Arab population, and Egypt is our population. They don't shoot at Egypt. You know why? Because the Egyptians would smash them if they dared to launch one missile at Egypt. Because Egypt is not like Israel. Human rights in Egypt are unheard of. And they couldn't care less about the Palestinians from their point of view. The Palestinians could drown in the Mediterranean, and nobody will hear about this. And that's why they are very careful when it comes to the Egyptians. Why is the border with Egypt closed? Why can't they breathe? Go out from Rafah, the city which is next to Gaza from the Egyptian side. Nobody demands Egypt. And this is, you know, discrimination of lower expectations. Unfortunately, the world expects from Israel things which the world does not expect from the Arab world in general, and from Egypt in this case in particular. So this is more or less part of the problem which is portrayed by the media as if Israel is responsible. By the way, let me ask you a question, each and every one.
And we'll finish with that.
If you find under your property a gas field and it belongs to you, how long will it take you to catch the first lawyer and to sign an agreement with one of the Shell Oil, whatever, to make you the richest man on earth with this gas field under your property? Okay?
Hours.
How many?
24 hours.
It will not take you 10 seconds. Okay? Israel gave the PA, a gas field in front of Gaza. In 1998, when Ehud Barak was the prime minister, until this very day, and I'm talking about 25 years ago, they did not take out even 1 cubic centimeter of that gas. You know why? Because they fight who will take the money between these and those. That's why they are poor. They could be richer than Singapore in Gaza if they knew how to deal with each other and to divide the revenues of that gas. This is the problem. Not because of Israel, because they don't get along with each other. Just look at the divide between Hamas and the PA. which is already more than 16 years, they cannot sit with each other. This is the problem, the division, which is partially based on families. And here, what family issues came to.
Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Dr. Kedar.
let me conclude.
Just
Let
need
me
to hand out.
conclude with one sentence. In the Middle East, peace is given only to the powerful and the invincible, when people leave them alone. This is Middle Eastern peace. If Israel will be powerful and invincible forever, Israel will enjoy peace forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kedar and Dr. Shitaki, for making the effort and coming. I hope that, Andreen, that next time you will come and visit the region, you know, somehow we will figure this out. Thank you so much, and we can head out after Guy to the bus to our next stop.